Thank you for joining us for the next hour or two in this episode of Insight Myanmar podcast. In an age of nearly limitless content, we appreciate that you're choosing to take valuable time out of your day to learn more about what is happening in Myanmar. It's vital for this story to be heard by people around the world, and that starts right now with you. On this episode of Insight Myanmar podcast, we're welcoming back Ashin Sarana for the third time to continue talking about the intersection of Buddhism and the recent political situation in Myanmar. And for this discussion, we're going to be mostly restricting our talk about Thabarwa Sayadaw, who Ashin Sarana recently had a meeting with, and he posted the video. They have a conversation in Burmese. I posted it online, and it got a lot of attention. We're going to be spending quite a bit of time talking about Thabarwa Sayadaw. There might be some people listening who have never heard of Thabarwa Sayadaw before, and we will be introducing something of him and his background and his mission in some detail. So fear not, you will learn about him as we go on. And there might be some listening that know about Thabarwa very well and have very fixed opinions on one side or the other. This is generally a very polarizing figure. There's not many people without an opinion. People are usually on one side or the other. And so we will be navigating these extremities of opinions and trying to talk in a nuanced way about our understanding of what Thabarwa Sayadaw is doing, what he really means, and trying to unpack this. This is no easy task. This is a topic that I think both of us, as well as maybe listeners out there, have spent many hours trying to understand and dissect and unpack to some degree. And that's what we're going to be doing here. So I don't really see the conversation that we're having shouldn't be looked at as authoritative or necessarily that we are providing the answers to this. This is an exploration, and we invite the listeners to go along with us as we try to unpack and understand a very complicated person who says rather ambiguous statements and other statements that seem far from ambiguous and are quite concerning and hurtful. We're going to be unpacking all of that. So with that introduction, Usarna, thank you once again for coming back to discuss with us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So let's get right into it. We are going to be talking more about who Thabarwa Sayadaw is and his mission and such. We'll be doing that as we go along on this episode, but I think rather than bring that into the foreground now, I think let's let that picture of him and his mission start to develop as we talk. Let's get right into the meat of the matter and the thing that drove this conversation today, and that's a meeting that Usarna had with Thabarwa Sayadaw several weeks ago in Vietnam, which was recorded, did go on Facebook in Burmese language, where Usarna really confronted Thabarwa Sayadaw and opened up a dialogue about certain views he has or statements that he makes. For those members of the audience who don't speak Burmese or who aren't aware of the talk, Usarna, can you describe a bit first why you wanted to meet him and the circumstances behind the meeting, and then as far as you can, explain in some detail what this talk consisted of, what you discussed, as well as if you had prepared or thought about how you might like to approach him and bring these subjects to bear?
I know Thabarwa Sayadaw for a few years already, so we have a very good relationship. Thabarwa Sayadaw, um, Thabarwa Sayadaw was very happy that I was teaching Dhamma in his monastery in Dalian in Myanmar several years ago. This ended more or less by the time when when I left from Myanmar, and actually a little earlier. It was ended sometime probably before the coup. So by 2000, I think by 2020. But until then, for about 2 years, I think I visited his monastery once every 2 weeks to give a Dhamma talk in English for the foreign yogis who visited the monastery to meditate, to help, and also for about an hour or two for the Burmese people who lived in the monastery. So once every 2 weeks, I had a small trip to the Bawa center. We would leave early in the morning from Legu. We would travel to Yangon. We would have meal. I mean, me and my students, my meditator yogis, and then we would continue to Dalian southwards, and then we would arrive by the afternoon. I have about 1.5 hours Dhamma talk for the foreigners, another about 1 hour or 2 hours for the Burmese, and then we would return back to Hlagu, returning by night. So this would be once every 2 weeks for about 2 or 3 years. And this, of course, created a very nice and very good relationship between me and Thabarwa Sayadaw, because on one hand, I was able to share my Dhamma teaching, which increased the number of my students. And we also recorded these Dhamma teachings and we put them on YouTube, and they were very successful. So that further increased my reach, so that I had more students and more supporters and so on. And it, of course, also increased the conscience, or how to say that, it increased the number of people who knew about the Bawa Center, and it increased the knowledge of Dhamma, and let's say the confidence about the Dhamma practice in the practitioners who lived in Thabarwa, because it seems that they didn't have many resources for Dhamma, for questions and answers, for meditation instruction, and so on in Thabarwa, or so I understand it. So it seemed that we are like cooperating together, me and Thabarwa Sayadaw, on the Dhamma understanding, on the Dhamma life of people both from foreign countries as well from Myanmar. And then there were times when we would meet with Thabarwa Sayadaw when he was there in the center, in his center. So there was even time when we would meet there, and he would sit on one of the Dhamma teaching thrones to teach Dhamma, and he would invite me to sit on another throne right at the same time. And he would be teaching in Burmese, and I was translating him directly to English. And so it seemed to be very nice, and he was very kind to me. And then one time I had a problem to find a monastery. I had to find a problem to find a monastery because the monastery where I lived had some problem with the villagers, and apparently due to the COVID. And the chief monk told us that now the people in the village, they don't want us because it's COVID and they're afraid of us as foreigners, so we should go. And but that, of course, was the last drop after several other problems. And so we were searching for a monastery in a very urgent way. And Thabarwa Sayadaw was very kind to provide us with some opportunities. They were not successful, but still, I'm very thankful to him for those opportunities and for that hope that he was creating in our minds. And so I had a very nice relationship with the Sayadaw. And as I was now staying, I'm still staying in Vietnam. I heard that Thabarwa Sayadaw was expelled from San Francisco due to due to his opinions and due to his speech about the army, the military in uh, in Myanmar. So actually, before I learned that he came to Vietnam, I already saw the video as people were demonstrating in San Francisco, and I was thinking, I just left because I actually left one day from San Francisco. I left from San Francisco right one day before I learned that he is there. And I thought, wow, one day I missed him. If I were there, I would go to see him and speak with him about that. And about 3 days later, I learned that he came to Vietnam, exactly to the same place where I was. So it seems like, in the Western terms, not the Buddhist terms at all, it seems like we had a fate, or um, more Western terms, or a little bit to India, we had the energy. There was an energy in the air that made us to meet. That we were definitely destined to meet. So this was so interesting. Um, I and Thabarwa Sayadaw have a very nice, friendly, cooperating relationship, not just about monastery and Dhamma teaching, but in many other ways. And so, because I didn't see him for several years, that means I saw him, I think, last time before this was before COVID started. So that's about 3 years, and I never had any problem with him. We never had any argument. We never had any difficulties. I did know about his views about military, and I did not agree with them. And I was wondering, how does he like navigate his life with these ideas? But between me and him, there was no problem, no friction, no troubles. And again, we were cooperating very nicely. So I thought definitely need to see him and tell him hello.
Okay, well, that's some really good background understanding your relationship with him on a personal level and going back years
Yeah.
before the pandemic. I'm thinking about what direction to go next, and we definitely want to get into your talk with him, what you brought to him and how he responded. But maybe before we get there, it would make sense first to just recap some of what the Baba Sayadaw has said, that has led people to suspect and claim that he is pro-military. It should be said that as far as the Baba Sayadaw himself goes and his entourage, they have consistently insisted that they are not pro-military, despite some of these statements. So just for the record, to say that, but the reason that he was protested in San Francisco and the reason that there have been other activities against him is because his language has inferred to many that he is anti-democracy, pro-military, anti-non-Buddhist that are in the country. So let's take a moment to just recap what he has said since the coup that has given people this impression. Uh, I have some statements that I've collected and refreshed my memory with that we can discuss here. But maybe, Usarna, you can go first and share what you've heard and what your knowledge is, and then I'll fill in the gaps from things you might not cover.
Hmm. Yeah, sure. I think you will have a better set of his saying because I am not that much interested in these things, and in I mean in what Thabarwa Sayadaw said uh, regarding regarding the military. But I remember one of the first things that I have received from my donors about the Thabarwa Sayadaw was relatively a short time after the coup, when he is saying that the that of course it's better if the military alone is in power, because when there is one party in power it is easier to decide and resolve problems. If there are many parties, then they may be in argument, so it's difficult to decide on anything.
Right, and it's certainly it certainly baffles the mind to hear this kind of statement and then wonder how the speaker of this statement is not blatantly pro-military. It's hard to wrap your mind around that kind of logic.
When I visited him, I told him about two, but I was not very. I was a little bit lucky for being a little ignorant about what he has said about Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, because probably if I saw his long speech, his long critical speech about Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, which he made probably in San Francisco, but I'm not exactly sure, very recently. Probably if I heard his speech about the Aung San Suu Kyi, I would either not visit him or I might be quite coarse when talking to him. Because I didn't hear that speech, I was very open and very friendly and very nice. After I left, somebody sent to me the video where he's talking critically about Aung San Suu Kyi, and I'm thinking, wow, I'm so lucky I didn't see this video.
Mm,
And he's talking critically about Aung San Suu Kyi, suggesting that actually she is responsible for all of the ills that are in Myanmar.
mm,
And uh, before this, I have heard that he suggested to U Ten U, who is a member of the National League for Democracy (NLD), that Daw Aung San Suu Kyi should not engage in politics anymore because she is apparently the reason for these problems. That means for the coup and so on. And the problem was that he didn't say anything about anything like that about the military. So the people were wondering, why does he suggest that Daw Aung San Suu Kyi stops her work, but he doesn't suggest to the military that they stop their work. So this was the second statement that I was aware of before I met him. But again, there is a video uh, where he is, um, uh, saying, in Czech we use the ironic word peril. So he is saying peril after peril after peril.
right. So let me go into some of my notes, and I should mention also for listeners, I have conducted several interviews with the Bawa Sayadaw. Listeners to this platform might notice the first episode was the Bawa Sayadaw. And since the coup, that, and I should mention that episode really was his biographical details. And in his story, he talks about all the persecution he faced at the hands of the military. He talks about being Chinese Burmese, and so he was prevented from seeking certain higher education in certain fields because he was not pure Bamar. He mentions how in the interview, which was recorded, maybe 2019, he mentions how the only way that his mission in his monastery was able to survive was that the NLD was voted into power during the transition, that the military were consistently trying to shut them down, and that they were helping and supporting people on the margins of society, which was not seemly for a monastery in the military's eyes. And also, by helping these marginalized communities, it was revealing the dark, dirtier side of Myanmar society that the military didn't want people to know about. And it was only when, during the transition, when there were greater freedoms and more foreigners being able to come in, which led to some of the foreign meditators and volunteers that came, as well as media starting to pick up on things, as well as some of their missions, that it was only the democratic transition which led to their really their survival. He says it very clearly in that interview. With that preface, let me share some of my notes about some of the sentiments that Thabarwa Sayadaw has expressed since the coup. One of his feelings is he has shown a deep suspicion of, and even paranoia of, development, and has expressed a view that development is, and by development he has indicated economy, education, work opportunities, um, these everything that goes into development, access to outside of Myanmar, so being able to have access with foreign countries and foreign people have access with them, that development is not compatible with Buddhism. And so, as a country and a society develops, people lose their devotion to Buddhism. The corollary, of course, being that the only way to maintain traditional Buddhism is to prevent any kind of development. He hasn't actually said that, but he has said the opposite consistently, that development is taking away traditional Burmese Buddhist beliefs, and that's a concern. Um, there was a moment when Sayadaw was asked about the Rohingya crisis, which has since been termed a genocide. I want to read his response in quotations. In this case, a lot of people are in the protest, and in that protest, there are some who are aggressive in nature and who incite violence as they can't control their emotions. There are a lot of people, so there are a lot of misunderstanding and mistakes. More importantly, there are a lot of misunderstanding with people believing in these false rumors, who see truth and falsehood, and they say falsehood and act falsely, which becomes harder to control, end quote. That's just an example of how obtuse and ambiguous some of his statements are. I refer back, this was a question about the Rohingya genocide, and his answer was about the so-called fake truths and immaturity of the democracy activists who were protesting against the military regime. And so this is certainly a way of avoiding any kind of mention of the Rohingya genocide, while also making sure that his criticism of those democracy activists be heard, that insinuating these democracy activists are not only immature, but are inciting violence and are believing in fake truths. I'm just going to read directly that he said, these are all quotes in his language. From the religious point of view, I can understand the military is also right in its own way. When people become educated, they become arrogant and start thinking they know the best. I am educated. I am a doctor. I am an engineer. As long as you don't give up this pride, you are your own master. You don't let anyone teach you. Then their religion becomes weaker. Every developed country has this problem. As a soldier, on one hand, he is doing unwholesome deeds, so he has to take refuge in religion. When he was asked about the military's predilection for superstition and numerology rather than the strict teachings of the Buddha, and as many people know, they're very superstitious and believe in all this astrology outside the guidelines of the Buddha. And when he was asked about how the military is trying to manipulate the faith and use these kinds of mystical and magical beliefs to stay in power, he was not critical. He said that this was a good starting place and that it might seem like it's a surface, superficial thing, but it actually brought the practitioner to the essence. So those military leaders that are very much going against core Buddhist teachings by bringing in these superstitious elements, the Baba Sayadaw saw that as an entryway in order to become good Buddhists, basically. Here's some other quotes of what he said. One of the strengths of the military is the advantage of religion. On the one hand, they do things, but they also do a lot of good things, building pagodas, supporting religion. Also, they can do it because they have the power. In the border areas, there is no one to do it. There is not even Buddhism in those areas. The army is the only one who is doing good in those areas, building pagodas, monasteries, giving alms, etc. This was one of the more shocking statements I heard. We know about the documentation of human rights groups for generations in the ethnic areas of Myanmar, where there is systematic sexual violence and rape and torture and airstrikes and ground assaults and arrest and deaths, arbitrary arrest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In these border regions where you have ethnic minorities and religious minorities living, Thabarwa Sayadaw is claiming on the record that the military is doing good things in this area because they are Buddhists and the people living there are not. So this, to me, when I heard that statement, my mouth dropped. And every time I go back to this, I'm shocked anew of this kind of reframing of history. He goes on to say, and this is a core statement, without strength, the military cannot stand for long. That is for sure. No matter if their work is unwholesome, they must have advantages. They cannot survive so long without the advantages. The fact that the military is in power for so long is because they have some kind of advantage. Their main strength is the power of Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. No matter what they use it for, you use it to achieve what you want to get. If you apply it wrong, you will suffer, you will not get benefit, and they rely on that power, that's for sure. And so, in other words, he's saying that their good karma has brought them to their authoritarian rule, not their corruption, not their killings, not their illegal coup, not their overturning democratic elections. All the documented things that these military leaders have done for so long that has got them in power, not unlike Putin, not unlike Hitler, not unlike Mussolini or some of these other dictators, that the reason that these military leaders are in power are because they have done very good and wholesome deeds in the past, and we should respect that. By this logic, any dictator, any bully, any brute has that power because of the good deeds he's done, and so by this reckoning, Hitler has enormous good karma, and that's something that we should respect. This is certainly a concerning statement. A couple other items here, and then I'll throw it back to you. He has said, it's important to solve this from the Buddhist perspective as well, or else external forces like the UN and US would not take religious perspectives into their solution as they're not Buddhists themselves. They will not view this from a Buddhist perspective, which will not be complete. In this country, people follow the Buddhist teachings, and it is mixed with politics. In other words, he's saying this is a Myanmar problem, and outsiders that are trying to help, whether it be humanitarian services or political reconciliation or sanctions or whatever the role that the international community is playing, and this is a refrain that he says very often, because they are not Burmese Buddhists, they cannot understand and they cannot help. And anything they do will try to erode the faith in Triple Gem that we have in this country. And so they should stay out and let us handle it. That's a consistent refrain that he says. He goes on to say that if everything else prospers at the expense of Buddhism, it is a loss for the whole world in this country. Another indication that he does not see development as compatible with Buddhism and sees it very much as a threat, and that these two things are at odds. In terms of monks, we are peaceful, and the military has been taking a position that they are prioritizing the monks. They are showing that they do not wish to harm Buddhism. They seem to have learned from their past mistakes. People tend to exaggerate things. There are a lot who blame the army for everything. Some news are not true. People believe them whether they're true or not, as long as it says the army is bad. This fake news incites hatred and revenge and makes things worse. If we want to control this, it's important to know the source of the information and the news and detail of what happened. There are a lot of fake news. And so, in other words, again, he's going back to describe how the military is the institution in Burma that is truly respecting and regarding and revering the Triple Gem, that the NLD is not, the foreign community is not, the ethnic minorities and religious minorities are not. And so these are all the danger. And the military might not be perfect, but it's the one entity that is really safeguarding Triple Gem, without this, Buddhism is at risk. And he says outright in this last quote that those that are pointing to the negative things the military is doing, they're immature, they're emotional, they're exaggerating things, they're inciting hatred, they're giving false information just to rile people up and make the whole country unstable, which then the foreign community is somehow encouraging and making worse. And the military is in this role as both protector of Triple Gem as well as victim from these lies and exaggerations and slander that it's being faced with. And so this is what Thabarwa Sayadaw is expressing. And while expressing this, whenever someone claims he is pro-military, he insists he is not, that he's absolutely not pro-military. And that is confusing to read quotes like this, to read this litany of quotes, to read that he has said on record that the military is doing good things in ethnic areas, that it has terrorized for generations. It is difficult to hear that kind of language and then reconcile that with the fact that the speaker does not think he's pro-military. One thinks they must be deluded, or there's some piece that is not being understood. And so this is the mystery of unraveling and unpacking what he's really meaning by this. There's one last quote that I want to read because I think it's very significant, and then I'll turn it over to you. There was an interviewer who asked him, I'll just go ahead and read this transcript. The interviewer says, "Currently, the casualties include many people from Islam as well. As a Buddhist monk, what would you say to this?" His answer is, "For me, there are a lot more Buddhist people, as this is a Buddhist country. Believers of other faith are in the minority. Buddhists are in the majority, both in the army and the civilian side." The interviewer then says, "In a country like this, even though it's a Buddhist country, Muslims who are in the minority are getting killed on a large scale. What is your response to this?" His answer: "The important thing, as I understand, is that people cannot control their anger and emotion. People who don't intend to terrorize or be aggressive, but as more people get involved, it gets harder to control. There are a lot of diverse people, so within that group, there are some who can't keep their emotions in check. In this case, a lot of people who are in the protest, and in that protest, there are some who are aggressive in nature and who incite violence, and they can't control their emotions. There are a lot of people, so there is a lot of misunderstanding and mistakes. More importantly, there is a lot of misunderstanding with people believing in false rumors, who see truth and falsehood, so they say falsehood and act falsely, which becomes harder to control." So I just want to back up for a moment and look at this question and answer because it's very interesting. 2 times he is asked about the Islamophobia and the killing of Muslims in Myanmar. His first answer to this question is by pointing out that this is a Buddhist country. This is a majority Buddhist country. That's it. Nothing else. Just a blanket statement. We don't know what he means by that, but a blanket statement that does not acknowledge the killing, does not touch upon that, but just informs and affirms this is a Buddhist country. And there's no more comment. When he's asked again, more explicitly, about the killing of Muslims and Rohingya, his answer is to say that democracy activists are believing in fake news, they're emotional, they're immature, and they're believing in things that are not true, that slander the military. So these statements are, they're very concerning and very confusing to unpack. These are some of my notes. I have much more I can get into later. I think I've talked possibly longer than I ever have on a podcast as a host. I usually like to turn it over to the guest. Let me refer back to you and your thoughts of these statements if you've heard them before, and then get into your conversation with him.
No, I haven't heard these quotes. So, well, what can I say about that? Well, some of them I find funny and some of them quite concerning. I feel that Sayadaw simply has his way of understanding the reality, and that's how the humankind is. Like different people have diverse ways of understanding and interpreting the data that their eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind provide to them.
Could I just interject a moment with that hypothesis? Because there has been a suggestion by some scholars that we are living in what's called a post-truth world, and this has been referred to with Putin and Trump especially. What is meant by this is that all truth has become relative, and we live in our own bubbles, and there's not even any basic facts we can agree on anymore. And an example of this would be that, and I know, Usarana, that you don't pay attention to worldly events, so you may not know these details. But after Trump's inauguration in 2016 in America, he claimed falsely that more people attended his inauguration than any other inauguration in history, and especially Obama's, because he felt competitive and insecure with Obama. All types of photographic and video evidence counting the people that were there clearly show that this is a highly false statement, that factually speaking, there is no way that there were more people that came to his inauguration than Trump's. And you can see the images side by side. And yet he claimed that this was true. And so people in his administration had to therefore similarly claim that this was true. When do we say there's different opinions and different interpretations? And when do we say that there are statements being made that are simply untrue and not in accordance with all of the facts that are available?
I think it depends on whether we are aware of the motive or not. And because I'm not aware of the motive, then I'm led to think that it's the Sayadaw's weakness in assessing the two sides. As soon as I would understand the motive, it would be easier. Now, in terms of the Burmese people's attitude, they believe that the Sayadaw is getting lands and money and support from the military. And their number one suggestion is, or interpretation is, that he is supported by the military and therefore he needs to maintain the support. But we have already heard from you that the Sayadaw's center itself has appeared thanks to the democratic efforts. That military actually was not helpful in that process. Just recently, I have heard that actually the Sayadaw is supported by military, that he is actually getting support, but those are totally unverified statements, and they're totally oral in nature. So they could be totally wrong and very inaccurate. That means without any details, without any appropriate explanations. So there are definitely Burmese people who believe that the Sayadaw is supported by the military until today. And because he is supported and because he needs to maintain that support, he is on their side. But I think it would be definitely interesting to get more information about whether he is really supported and how much, to what level, and whether he would really lose something of that support or all of that support if he stopped to be outspoken about Aung San Suu Kyi. Because it seems that the Burmese people don't really mind that much his supportive speech of the military. They are rather concerned about his negative speech about Aung San Suu Kyi. So the problem is not that he is speaking as if he was supporting military, or I have not heard that kind of concern from the Burmese people. But it seems that the Burmese people are more disappointed that he is speaking negatively about Aung San Suu Kyi, and he has given a considerable talk separately on negative negative qualities of Aung San Suu Kyi, which is very how to say that very very much harming his reputation. I think if he did not give this kind of talk, it is, I think, several minutes from an interview, I think, with the media, where he's having a relatively lengthy speech on what Aung San Suu Kyi did wrong. And this is a very, very bad speech. He's taking assumptions, he's taking ideas, he's taking inaccurate information, and he puts it together and just presents it as if Aung San Suu Kyi is a very bad person, and that's it. So she's a very bad person. See what she is doing. See what she has done, and so on and on and on. And this is not good at all for him or for anyone, and he shouldn't have done that. So this is something that he has done very wrong, and it is something that gets the Burmese people to criticize him very much. I think that the people are not really aware of any particular talk where he is specifically supporting the army.
You know, he has said that he is the only person that is capable of resolving this conflict. He also said before the coup that he was the only person that was capable of establishing world peace. I don't say this with any humor. I don't say this with, it's with sarcasm. These are actual things he says and that he's believed. And these are things that his followers and his disciples and his entourage have repeated. When during one of our interviews that wasn't published, I confronted him and said, basically, respectfully as you can be saying this, you're delusional. If you think that you have any kind of good faith among the democracy activists for what you've said and what you've done, that they will listen to you and you can guide them, you're delusional. You're in a bubble, because they you have said things that unless you apologize for and try to listen more than you talk, then I don't think you have any chance of this. I also think, going back to that Trump example, Trump, when he was running for election, in 2016, he said he was the only person who was capable of solving the crisis or the problems in America. This is a sign of, to me, a messiah complex, really. That if you're in any kind of system and you think that you are the only person capable of achieving something on a grand level, you're flirting with something of a messiah complex there. I don't want to psychoanalyze, but I think that has to be thrown in there, because these are not usual things to hear from leaders, and especially from their followers, who repeat that with kind of a glaze in their eyes, that that really believe that. That being said, I think if you look at his statements, even he says a number of things that are very contradictory. On one hand, he talks about how he's the only person who's respected by both sides and who's able to find a crisis, a resolution to the crisis for both sides. But on the other hand, if you look at what he says post coup, his statements are consistently always pro-military and negative towards democracy activists or democracy leaders. They are constantly reframing the military in a positive light and casting doubt and suspicion and immaturity and negativity and suspicion, paranoia towards democracy actors, whether they're leaders like Aung San Suu Kyi, whether there's their Generation Z, whether they're Western allies that are involved in any way. They are, and this is consistent. And so this is quite a contradiction to be so one-sided in the analysis being given, and yet to believe that he actually is positioned to be in the middle of both sides. It's hard to make sense of that.
When I visited him, he said that he is not on any of the sides, that he doesn't support the Aung San Suu Kyi, he doesn't support military in what they are doing. He explained to me that both of them need to stop doing violence, because that's what he believes the Aung San Suu Kyi is doing. He believes she is doing violence. And he doesn't realize that she's in prison, so she cannot do any violence. But it doesn't matter for the topic now. And so as he was talking about it, I was wondering So why doesn't he suggest that the military should stop it, like outside, when he's talking, um, to the media and so on? And he says this is not the way to do it with the military. He basically explained to me that there are special ways of dealing with the military that he probably thinks are more effective. And one of the ways is not telling them is not telling them uh, to uh, to uh, act according to the law. That means, for example, not to do a coup, which is a treason. So this has been the coup by the military has been actually identified as treason by the Burmese lawyers. So that's something that I pointed out to him, that actually the military has committed treason, and for that treason they sorry, based on the Burmese law, they should be condemned to death. They should be executed. And so, if me and him now suggest now and together with many other people, that the military stops, goes away from the government buildings, and they release all of those who they have detained as political prisoners, then there may be a chance that the president Uwe, who is actually the official president until now, except that he was in prison until recently. There is a very interesting news that the military actually gave amnesty to Aung San Suu Kyi and the president Wu Mien just very recently. So it seems that they're going to be released soon. And the military, if they leave and they put things right, maybe they will get actually amnesty. Maybe they will actually get permission, so they will not be killed. So if we want to stop killing, then we actually should ask the military to stop doing anything with politics, because as soon as they stop doing with politics, there is a higher chance that they will be forgiven than if they don't do than if they continue in politics and cause more harm. So this was my rationale why we should actually encourage the military to leave uh, politics and let the democratic parties do their job. But it seems that the Sayadaw doesn't feel like this is a good idea. But again, he was repeating again and again that he is not on any of the two sides. But at the same time, he cannot ask the military to follow 5 precepts or to stop doing anything about politics, because if he does that, then the military will not listen or they could be disappointed. So he doesn't want to do that. So all of these things are actually on the video, or I think so. The video that is published by me, that was I did publish it, that's true, but actually I did not make that video. It was my assistant who made it and who edited the video, and some other people who prepared the subtitles. But as for me, I just published it when it was done. Then there, I think the Sayadaw is also saying some of these things, but we don't have the video complete. You will find the complete video from the discussion from some of his supporters who were taking the video uh, at the same time as my assistant. My assistant ran out of memory in his phone, so he could not take the video of all of that discussion. So the
Right.
Sayadaw was indeed repeating again and again that he is actually not supporting any of the two sides. I later heard that he, from an interview that he did about a few days after an interview with me, with with some media, probably online, he explained there that he actually visited the military, and he specifically asked them not to do the violence. But the military, who does not accept that they're doing any violence, who does not take any credit for that, of course cannot do anything with these kinds of admonishments, because they would first have to be proven that they're actually doing some violence, and this is something very difficult for a monk to do, let alone Thabarwa Sayadaw, who does not store videos, from Facebook, and does not handle phone in the way that he would just show the videos to the military to say, "Hey, see, here's the video. You did, you did that." And another very interesting thing was that Thabarwa Sayadaw believes basically everything that the military says. And
Yeah.
when I was suggesting to him that the people in the villages can see very clearly that that it's the military who came and who's doing the violence, he said, "Well, surely that's the PDF who took on, the military dresses or the uniforms, and then how do you know? And then surely it's the PDF who's actually doing all the violence in the villages, and
Wow.
not the military."
Wow. Yeah, I mean, this is what's so confusing is that he has a cleverness with language, and yet, despite saying he's not taking sides, he consistently frames every discussion around the good things the military is trying to do and the bad things that the democracy activists have done and are capable of doing. And so it's difficult to read into this how he believes that he's not taking sides. Another clever feature of the language I want to bring out from that I learned from my series of conversations with him post coup is that he kept coming back to the fact that he seemed to feel that he had a deeper access to the truth and to cause effect than most of others, and that this deeper wisdom has him living on a plane of non-duality, a higher plane of wisdom and insight that basically makes his truths and his understanding more correct than others, and that he needs to educate others in terms of the the sublime profound truth that he has access to that others do not. This came out in some of the circular conversations we'd have. I would encounter this logic, and it took me a while before I was able to understand and see the pattern. I'll give an example of how this developed. In one of those conversations, we spent 45 minutes on one point. The point was that he was continuing to say that development and education will necessarily bring about a loss of faith in Buddhism. And so then I would ask him, does that mean that Buddhism is incompatible with any kind of development, and that a society must be kept poor, uneducated, without opportunities? And that was the only way Buddhism could flourish, because this is obviously the corollary of what he said. When I would ask him that, his response was again circular. He would comment on that he was more concerned about the mental state of attachment. And I said, okay, well, that makes sense. I said, Buddhism is encouraging us to be detached no matter what the material reality. So I would clarify the question many times over and say that, well, can we imagine a developed society with opportunities in education and economy where we look at the mental attachment of those new opportunities coming? Because after all, it all comes back to the mental cultivation and the level of attachment in the mind. And so that there would be a way to develop the country where you were really looking at the mental attachment. So one of the questions that I posed him at the end of this talk is I asked him, are you saying that development necessarily leads to a loss of faith? Or are you saying that development is okay as long as we're detached through this changing material reality? And I didn't really get an adequate answer to that question. I got kind of Dhamma lectures and talks about Buddhist philosophy, and in trying to kind of take apart this contradiction. And eventually he said, in essence, something to the extent of, because I am so in touch with the truth, I can actually say things that appear to be in contradiction to normal people, but I can see past those contradictions. And once I reached a logic like that, I didn't really know where else to go. It just seemed like whatever kind of understanding you were trying to get, if the speaker was under a belief that their access to a deeper truth was so profound that they could speak in terms of apparent contradictions and not have to sort out those contradictions, I don't really know how to navigate a discussion beyond that point.
Okay. Yeah, I think that Sayadaw is doing his best. He feels, or at least he believes that. I'm laughing because I feel like the I personally find here one very interesting thing about the Sayadaw. Like usually when you see somebody saying weird things, or when I see somebody saying weird things, it is very easy for me to dismiss it, saying they have so much of anger or they have greed. And we can see that with quite a few people also saying, you know, this is because the Sayadaw has greed because he wants to get the support from the military. And some others may say, oh, that's because he's angry, because something else. But when I was discussing with the Sayadaw, I was actually challenging him incredibly fiercely at some points. And I think I was pretty coarse at some points. But the Sayadaw never showed even a little bit of negative emotion, like zero. Even when the discussion seemed to be hot, so to speak, the Sayadaw never ever showed even a little bit of anger. And so even from that standpoint, I really was not able to see even a tiniest little bit of anger, even a tiniest little bit of anger in his mind, regardless how I tried to challenge him in whatever ways, totally no anger ever. And it seems that I'm not the only person who has never ever noticed any anger in his mind throughout the time that he has been believed to be actually fully enlightened, to be an arahant. So this definitely is something that needs to be included in the discussion, because it's very common for us to be angry or disappointed when somebody is challenging us or when things don't go the way we expect. At least a little bit of anger, you know. So we showed it in a very subtle way, so the other people see, yes, we are disappointed. But the Sayadaw never showed even a slightest disappointment, regardless how I would be talking to him. Even a little bit of that is totally never, no, zero. So this is, yeah, this is definitely something we need to consider as interesting thing. And for me, as a monk who's interested in meditation, and a monk who teaches meditation, who has quite a lot of students in various countries in the world, and who teaches loving kindness, and who's very much keen on the practice of avoiding anger and dealing with anger and so on. Also, as a student of clinical mental health counseling in an American university, I can tell that this is definitely something that needs to be considered. And for me, a very important question, again from the standpoint of a Buddhist monk, is, can an arahant or an anagami, you know, because both arahant and anagami are non-returner, that's the third level of enlightenment. We have 4 levels in Buddhism. So arahant is the fourth, anagami is the third. Can an anagami or arahant who are characterized by total deliverance from all anger and greed as well, can they actually have totally ridiculous, totally, uh, totally bogus and wrong and delusional ideas about political situation, about other people, and about what should be done and what should not be done? I'm trying to think of a scripture that could be affirmative or denouncing, but so far I'm not able to find that kind of scripture. So that doesn't mean that it's true or not. I'm not deciding it. I'm just saying that I don't know. And one thing, however, that needs to be added, but that probably is not in place here, and that is in Vinaya Pitaka commentary. There is a saying that if a monk or whoever, layperson, or a nun or lady, whoever, if they become enlightened, there is no way how they can get a mental, how they can get crazy. There is the word crazy. Now, the scriptures do not properly address craziness. They do not properly address it. That means in the comparative way that we have today in psychology. And I have about 1 year of master's degree program, clinical mental health counseling behind me. So I have read several books and I have done several exams and so on and assignments. So I believe that I have some tiny little bit of knowledge about mental disorders. And I can tell that the level to which mental disorders are diversified today by psychology is totally way away from what we get in our scriptures in terms of treating specifically mental disorders. Our scriptures treat mind and the mental properties, that's true, but they're talking about the healthy mind. We do have there some details about mental disorders, but it's so little and it's so superficial that it is not comparable to the treatment, for example, in the DSM-5 Diagnostic Statistic Manual version 5 that's available today. Absolutely incomparable. We would have some little list of mental disorders in one of the jatakas, but again, it's just a list, it's superficial, and it's very simplified. So could we say that a delusional disorder or messianic complex or whatever it is, could we say that this is also a kind of craziness, and which would then say, okay, so that means that Thabarwa Sayadaw is not enlightened at all because he has mental disorder, and if you have mental disorder you cannot be enlightened? Could we say that? Probably not, because mental disorder today also, if we have to diagnose somebody, then according to the DSM-5, in most cases, you would have to be unable. You would have to be, out of capacity, or how to say that. You would have to be in a big disadvantage on your job or in your daily life due to that disorder. Whereas Thabarwa Sayadaw doesn't seem to be mentally disadvantaged by any kind of his ideas or opinions in whatever he is doing. He seems to be very healthy mentally. He's conversing well. He seems to be considering whatever he's told. Although he doesn't seem to be taking in the information, holistically, he seems to be reacting pretty well on the cognitive level, on any level that I'm thinking of. Sayadaw was actually answering as a fully healthy, mentally healthy person. So Sayadaw is saying things. That's his understanding. He's getting information from the military, who are very clever in deluding their members. and I wonder if that could be behind his wrong ideas. But at the same time, I'm still wondering if it would be possible for a non-returner or an arahant to have these kinds of ridiculous, um, very very unacceptable ideas.
Well, thank you very much for that. And you go in a lot of interesting directions that I want to touch upon. First, I just want to bring up this question that you're asking and expand it and ask, probably rhetorically, where is the line between madness and mental illness and genius and perhaps enlightenment? And I know for enlightenment, you're looking at a scriptural understanding of what the suttas say. But if we could just, and I know that the question I ask can really break down and you can get very granular. I don't want to go there just yet. I just want to ask, I want to frame what I'm about to say as part of this general question of where is the line between one's behavior skirting and drawing the boundaries between enlightened and mad mental illness and genius. And sometimes those lines are kind of hard to define. Sometimes the behavior that we're seeing externally and superficially can be difficult to know which belongs to which category. I'll also comment on how you said he's very cognizant in terms of how he's able to move throughout the day and speak and interact. In my mind, that feature, which I agree with as well, and I would also add that I agree with the feature, he doesn't show any anger. I've had some very contentious conversations with him. I've gotten riled up. I'm probably a little riled up right now, to be honest. This does get me emotional. I'm not enlightened, so I I can't remember the term you use, coarse. I think I definitely have that coarseness come up as well, and I have not seen that in him. Why that behavior is not being displayed is the greater question. And I think that, to respond to your statement that he is cognizant um, and, uh, and operative in many other functions, sometimes some high functions throughout his work. Well, that's true. But to me, that's neither here nor there. There are many cult leaders and mad prophets with messiah complexes and other kinds of mental illnesses that are extremely effective and successful in what they do. They're extremely charismatic and believing in who they think they are and what they have to offer the world. And they could not be effective unless they did have those abilities. And so, I think that does not exclude, that does not preclude the possibility of these things existing, that there's other things that he's doing really quite well. I mean, we have many examples in history of that being the case. So the last point I want to make, responding to what you said, is I agree with you that he is not taking in information. I have had these conversations with him, not recently, but immediately after the coup and then a year after the coup. And as with you, there was a lot of information I gave him. There was a lot of back and forth discussion we had. And yet there were no real exchange of views, because when you believe that you have access to a higher degree of truth and you're living in some kind of non-duality that allows you to say things which are in direct contradiction and perhaps even hypocritical, and you can't be challenged on them or you can't explain them because you're living in a higher abode of truth, means that your access to wisdom is greater than anyone else that you can talk to. Everything breaks down at that point, and I don't know how he's going to take in information from you that these are not PDF pretending to be the military to burn down villages, or from me in talking about a world where Buddhism and development can coexist, because his belief in his own access to truth is just so far above ours. The one thing I would add to what you say is that when you talk about how you mentioned the word ridiculous things, what does it mean what does it mean about someone's spiritual state if they're saying ridiculous things? And I just want to amend what you say, that and I want to remind as well that it's not just that he's saying ridiculous things. That in a way minimizes it, or doesn't underscore how dangerous and in some cases vile some of these statements are. It's that when we're talking about killing about the cardinal sin of all religions. And when he is presented with evidence or with a question about military killing Muslim or democracy activists or someone else, he's full of good things to say about the military, that is able to equivocate and not express sympathy for that that loss of life that took place. And on the other hand, when there are actions that he perceives as being harmful to the military, he's very quick to offer sympathies and goodwill and encouragement about, you know, what they're trying to do and what their real ambition is and their real aspiration. And so I think that this goes beyond the point of being ridiculous things, and they start to become sympathies and mental volitions that are actually responding to the act of killing, and sometimes not really responding with any sort of sympathy or acknowledgement about this loss of life, and instead looking for ways to defend an atrocity that was taking place, or to question if the atrocity really did or who was behind it, while also being able to defend and to support those that have committed the atrocities. So, you know, these are not just ridiculous things. This is getting into a mental volition of where he's siding with loss of life taking place.
Mm. One thing you may like to know, that during my conversation with Thabarwa Sayadaw, uh, it actually starts, it almost like somewhere close to the start, he actually said that he does not know everything about the present situation and that he is still learning. So it seems that either your conversation with him or somebody else's conversation with him apparently apparently reduced his confidence about his knowledge and understanding of the situation. Because when he spoke with me, or maybe it's just the way how he relates to me, and in contrast to the way how he relates to you as a layperson,
Oh, he said the
maybe
same thing to me 2 years ago.
he said the same thing to you. Well,
Of
then
course, yeah.
how do you put these two things together, that on one hand he has non-dual understanding and knowledge of everything, how how things should be, and on the other hand that he's still learning?
Well, because he can say anything, and because his understanding of cause and effect and non-duality and his wisdom and his access to truth is so much more refined than all of ours. There's no logic that we can use to question the seemingly contradictory things he says. And he said that to me outright in the interview. I mean, I can go and find that transcript and from the interview where we went round and round and round in all these circular ways, and I kept trying to understand where these contradictions fit together. And he eventually said, this is not for normal people. When I was presenting these contradictions over and over and over in their stark contrast, and trying to understand, how do these things go together, and if they don't go together, which one do you really mean? I was just trying to understand where he was coming from. He eventually said that his access to the truth was, and this is not a quote, I'd have to go back and see how he actually said it, but he eventually said, well, my access to understanding these things is just so far beyond other people that that I can say this because I can see this. And that also goes in line with his taking on a very paternalistic role, where he feels that it's his place to talk and not listen, because democracy activists are immature, they're emotional, they're inciting violence, they're believing in fake news. They just need to listen to his guidance, and that's how to resolve the crisis. That's what he also said.
Uh-huh. Hmm. Good to know.
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, those are definitely things that I didn't notice, and he didn't. Yeah, I'm very happy that you've had that discussion, so that we know a little better about his attitude about himself. But I wonder whether, um, there's this one English word, which may sound very negatively, but I do not mean it negatively, but it just sounds so negatively. So I think I cannot get out of that. I wonder if he's stuck, if he's stuck on, due to whatever reason, and therefore he's just not he's just not able, to proceed in his way, of understanding how things are. And here we are, looking really at the borderline between, and it's funny that borderline is also a word of a disorder.
Right. I was thinking that.
I'm not sure about genius. In Buddhism, for us, genius is not that important if we are not talking about the Buddha. But regarding madness and enlightenment, enlightenment should be void of madness. But truth is that fully enlightened persons still can have wrong understanding of the Buddha's teachings. And if a fully enlightened person can have wrong understanding about some, let's say, non-practical theoretical points in the Buddha's teachings, well, then surely he or she can also have wrong understanding about non-Buddhist teachings, such as politics. But what would be the level where a fully enlightened person can be totally wrong and moreover blatantly sharing and asserting their totally wrong perception? That is not mentioned in the scriptures. So on one hand, it's true he doesn't have anger, but on the other hand, it's true that he is sharing misperceptions and wrong ideas. So I personally, because I try to be as much as loyal to the scriptures as possible, I personally would be a little careful about, about people like that, and rather than throwing, insults and bad words, which should not be thrown even to somebody who is directly, doing wrong, who is a killer or who is a murderer or a thief or pedophile. These things do not really help anyway. So there are other ways that definitely help, such as, for example, counseling, of course. But I would rather, in case of monks who believe that they are enlightened, or who do, and especially those who do not seem to show any kind of marks of anger, I would simply not talk with them about issues that are not related to their meditation practice. And I would try to make sure that everybody knows that this person is not a reliable resource on anything related to the topics that are not related to their practice. This, I think, is the best we can do while still keeping ourselves, safe from, let's say, negative thoughts that could be, unskillful. And negative thoughts are unskillful anyway, regardless whether the person is truly wrong person or whether the person is enlightened. But again, being very, maybe you would say overly, but I don't believe it's overly. I believe it's just um, as much completely as possible. I'm trying to be loyal to the scriptures, and I'm trying to, protect the possibility that enlightened people may have very wrong and dangerous views. The Sayadaw already in the beginning, very close to the beginning of our conversation, told me that if he did support the military, he would not be a monk because he would be supporting their killing. That's what he actually told me. So he is aware of the fact that even if he believes that what the military does is the best that the military can do, which is so far the best interpretation that I can find somehow, fitting for what he seems to propose, still he does not support the killing. And his idea is that whatever he's saying, whatever he's doing, will gradually lead to reduction and cessation of all the killing. So I would not speak of madness in connection to enlightenment, but I would speak of wrong understanding. and wrong understanding is a wrong understanding. One thing I need to add, so that I'm really, uh, you know, honest about what the scriptures say, is that there is one kind of attachment that arahants entirely relinquish, and that's why I do not believe he's an arahant. But that still opens up the opportunity that he could be a non-returner. So an arahant actually gives up attachment to views. And I wonder if Thabarwa Sayadaw actually has attachment to a view regarding, here regarding military. So an
Mhm.
anagami, a non-returner, the third level of enlightenment, still can have attachment to views, and at the same time totally has no anger at all. So I wonder if this could be the case of the Sayadaw, that he's just attached to a view. And attachment to views is one of the worst attachments, one of the most difficult attachments to get rid of in our, as described in our scriptures. So I think he's simply attached to his views, and he just doesn't want to give that view away. And we can see this again and again with conspiracy theories. When we had COVID, there were a lot of very interesting, very amusing conspiracy theories, and the people were attached to these views, and they would be able to provide information that like confirms their views. And when I give them a little bit of mathematics, okay, so you can count it like this, you can count it like that, you can compare it with this and that, and they say, I know myself. They're not able to explain why they hold their belief, but they still continue holding their belief. It's an attachment to views. It's a separate kind of attachment in addition to desire for sensual pleasures, or attachment to sensual pleasures, attachment to ignorance, and attachment to existence. So we have four kinds of attachments. We call them floods, the four kinds of flood. So here, I would like to suggest that the Sayadaw doesn't really mean that killing is good, or that the military is doing good when they're harming others. It's just that the Sayadaw is attached to his view that the military
Mhm.
is bringing some benefit to the people.
I think there's some real truth in that, and that kind of aligns with where, after all these years, my what I've come to piece together as something of an analysis has come with that. I'm still open to changing it and considering. There are charges against him that he's pro-military, and I actually don't think that's the case. Not in the way that pro-military monks are generally understood, and I'll flesh that out. I think that monks, some of the senior monks in Burmese society that are pro-military, they're pro-military for very distinct reasons. They get money, they get standing, they get titles, they get offerings, um, famous and powerful students and donors, and everything that goes with it, everything that goes with being able to benefit from a really corrupt and violent regime. And you mentioned that there is indication that the military might have been supporting something financially. I'm not precluding that's a possibility, but I don't really see his actions, unless there's information I haven't been made aware of or something I haven't considered. I don't really see his actions and his statements fitting into the typical pro-military monk. The way that I see it is that he has as I've described before, he has a real paranoia and suspicion and deeply held discomfort with the idea of development. And that development might mean access to other countries, other types of thinking, other form of representative democracy, having equal rights for non-Buddhists that live in the country, any number of things, any number of ways that you're able to define development. He has consistently shown a high degree of discomfort and suspicion to that to that development. And as we all know, the military has prevented any kind of development taking place that benefits the Myanmar people for generations. And so, because they are a force to stop the thing that he is afraid of, he therefore he sees them as basically a benign institution. That's my kind of gut feeling of putting all this together, is that he's not inherently pro-military as some of the other monks are in the way that they're benefiting personally, even though that might be there. But I see it more that this deeply held suspicion of the modern world starting to approach the country and rip away the devotion that he sees to a traditional form of Buddhism, that this institution happens to be the only one who's trying to prevent this from happening, therefore holding up these traditional forms of practice. Therefore, whatever else wrong they're doing, they deserve our support and attention because at least they do this. Similarly, looking at the other side, whatever good qualities the democratic movement might have, because they're not trying to stop development and they're actually trying to encourage development, they are a potential force of destruction for traditional Buddhism in Myanmar. They are something to be feared and concerned. I think that this combination of factors, with the fact that he's not really able to take in other views, or we haven't really seen him able to engage and incorporate other ways of looking at things, aside from whatever he says about it, that he basically sticks to what his own belief is because he has such a belief in his own type of thinking and his own access to the truth that he sees in his mind, that this deeply held suspicion of development taking place, combined with seeing the military as a force for preventing the development happening and protecting traditional Buddhism, that if there is some kind of messianic complex in his mind, that this has developed into a grand truth that only he can see, and that he needs to find a way to, this circular thinking that he's then developed then attaches to a potential messianic form where his insights and his access are always more truthful and more correct than anyone else, any kind of engagement or critical discussion, because his abiding in non-duality gives him some kind of access that no one else has. This gives him a certain kind of confidence in this view that then becomes unshakable, and combined with the sort of influence and charisma and following he has, it then takes on greater proportions. The other day, in looking at some of his recent actually, it was something you sent me. You sent me a transcript of some of his a radio interview that I'm not sure who it was, maybe RFA, but it was
Yeah.
regarding his time in San Francisco. And he said some things that gave me a real insight in piecing things together that culminate in the argument I'm making here, but I never thought about it this way. And this is where, at some point in the discussion, in one of the answers, he defines peace as being reverence to Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, triple gem. That's very telling, and that's a real insight. So, in other words, you can have a society without violence that's inclusive. Well, you never have a society without violence, but a society that is without the kind of egregious violence we're seeing in Myanmar right now, state violence, that is inclusive of diverse peoples, has rule of law, has little corruption, et cetera, et cetera. But if there is no perceived devotion or state support for triple gem, then that's not peace. Or on the flip side, maybe you can have a racist society where there's constant brutality, state violence, oppression, lack of free expression, outward, but yet within that society there are outward manifestations to support triple gem. Well, that's peace. And so if he is defining a peaceful society as meaning reverence towards triple gem, that is a very different understanding to how we look at peace, or stability, or a fair and equitable society that we look at in the modern world. So I think that if that is really his understanding, that he equates a peaceful society with reverence to Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, then clearly he is prioritizing and analyzing uh, uh, structures of society very differently than how a normal layperson might.
This is definitely a problem, and I think we need to look at this very practically, and the Buddha's teachings is very practical. So when there are wars, there are wars. When there are no wars, when there's peace. So there could be one way of thinking about this. Maybe he's taking it like, if there's a Buddha Dhamma, then even when there are conflicts, those conflicts will be resolved, and the peace that will be established will be long lasting. Whereas when there is no Dhamma and there is peace, anytime there is an influence, or there is a so-called good, not good. There is a reason to wage war or to be violent. The people will be violent because they do not have Buddhism behind them to prevent that violence. Now, this, however, although this seems to me somewhat close to logical thinking, it is actually not correct according to scriptures. So we can see in our scriptures that it is actually possible for Buddhist lay people as well as monks to be not peaceful, to be to have conflict. So the Buddha explains there are five characteristics of ideal situation for practice, namely having enough meal, being young, being healthy, and then the remaining two are related to conflicting situations, namely being no conflict among the lay people and having no conflict among the monks. So the Buddha here implies that even though Dhamma may be fully widespread and well accepted, well received, still there may be non-peaceful situations which are so non-peaceful that they may create disturbance to one's meditation practice. And you may like to know that meditation practice in Buddhism is the essential key towards enlightenment and towards fulfillment of the summum bonum of the Buddha's teachings, towards accomplishing the ultimate aim of the Buddhists. So definitely in our scriptures, we do not see that Buddhism itself would be leading to peace. Let's think about the Buddha's lineage, or the family, the Sakyans, who were Buddhists and who followed the rule of not killing. Very, I'd say, very, not necessarily very simply, perfectly. They followed it perfectly to the level that they would not kill even the person who's just coming to kill them. So when they were invaded by an enraged leader due to some family problems and caused by the caste beliefs and caste system in and complications and system and complications in India. So the enraged leader of his army came up to kill the Sakyans. So the Sakyans actually seem to have first turn. And what did they do? Sakyans were masters in archery, so they did have actually their first turn and they could actually kill them. But instead of killing the enemy, and again, they were master archers, very, according to scriptures, they are very much eulogized for their profession in their precision of their archery skills. They did shoot their arrows, but they shot their arrows with the intention to scare the enemy. So they shot their arrows in such a way that the arrows do not kill anyone. And according to our scriptures, I'm not sure how's the history, but they actually did not kill anyone indeed. But the leader of the opposing army took it as a how do you call it, as a pretext, and he said, you see, the Sakyans, they say they don't kill anyone, and look at that, they're trying to kill you, let's go and kill them. So then they went up and they killed the Sakyans, sparing very few of them, and those few of them were spared only because they were not recognized as Sakyans. So I'm shortening the story, and those who know the story may not be happy about it, but Everybody can read it so that you see all of the details. Then, as we can see, the Sakyans, who are following the ultimate precept of Buddhism, that is not to kill, still they were massacred. So we can see here a proof that even if Buddha Dhamma is available, it doesn't say anything about peace in that community. It just provides you with the hope that if you practice correctly, if you dedicate yourself to generosity, morality, and meditation, that you may and may not, but that it's all about probabilities, that you may be able to increase the probability. No, you definitely increase the probability. It's just that you don't know what will really happen. So you increase the probability that your life now and in the future will be peaceful. The thing about Buddhism, about Kamma, is that it is not deterministic. We do not know whether our good actions will be bringing us happiness this life or next life or the other life or after 1,000 lives. We simply don't know. We know that we are increasing the probability of happiness and of happiness coming fast, but that's all. So the Buddha was very clear in Majjhima Nikaya. I think this is Maha Kamma Vibhanga Sutta 141. The Buddha explains there that if somebody came to him and he said, if somebody is doing good deeds, following the precepts, generous and having a right view, and so on and on, after they die, they will be born in heaven. And the Buddha says, if they say that, I will not agree. And if somebody says if somebody is killing and breaking the 5 precepts and having wrong view and so on, after they die, they will be born in hell. If somebody comes to me and says that, I will not agree. And then the Buddha explains that's because some people who follow the precepts, who are good, generous, and so on, they will be born in heaven, but some of them will be actually born in hell. And some of those who are doing bad deeds will be born in hell, that's true, but some of them will be born in heaven. Because it's not just about this one deed or 2 deeds or 1,000 deeds, it's about the actions done in this life and in many, many past lives. And this takes us, and so you could say, so what is Buddhism for? Well, then Buddhism has no value. And I say, no, you need to continue, because this is actually the point of Hinduism, or whatever you would call Hinduism. That means Hare Krishna and many other, and Vedantism and Brahmanism and all, and so on and on. All of them, or up to my knowledge, all of them agree about the law of Kamma. So in terms of Kamma, in terms of the teachings of the Buddha, that does not go beyond this world, that does not consider Nibbana yet, there is this problem with the world, that you actually don't know what will be happening to you when you do something. And that's where the Buddha comes and he says, let's go. It's enough. This has been enough, because we do not really have power over our future. So let's attain Nibbana and get rid of this cycle of rebirth, because the cycle of rebirth is not reliable. And so I would like to say that it is very important for us to consider the actions, the good actions and the bad actions, and the military, what they believe that they will be doing, bad actions and good actions. After they do their bad actions, they will be doing their good actions. They will mix up, and because of their building of the pagodas, they will then their good actions will mix up with the bad actions. So in the end, they will experience just a little bit of happiness because they mixed up. Sometimes the actions actually don't mix up. So I think in the case of military, they also need to consider the possibility that their good actions will bring them merit, but their bad actions also will bring them a lot of suffering.
So you bring up a lot of a lot of good points there, and I'll just mention the last point first, and then go into some other things. You talk about the mix of good and bad things they're doing. This is something that a good friend of mine calls karmic engineering, is the term that he's developed for it. He defines this term as the manipulation or interpretation of karma. This goes way back in Burmese Buddhism. We see this. This was a plot point in George Orwell's book when he was there, Burmese Days. He describes this karmic engineering, as it was described. And my friend has gone on to say how this is traced back to the commentaries of the Pali texts containing elements that deviate from the fundamental principles outlined in the Pali Canon. And you know about this as well as anyone, finding the little loopholes in commentaries that can promote the way you want to act, that are probably good for you materially, and can be kind of karmic concoctions where you can do a whole lot of bad and just a little good and kind of superficial, and then somehow tell yourself that it's not just balancing but actually coming in your favor. Where I also want to go is that I'm reminded of when I took my first 20-day course in the SN Goenka tradition. And there was something that Goenka said uh, in the first few days of that course that really I'd never heard before and really had a profound effect on me. Goenka described how for a new disciple of Buddhism, that to be a good meditator, simply to follow these 5 precepts is good enough. But then there's a threefold way, I think is how he described it, of following the precept, where, for example, the most basic thing you could do is not to break the precept. But then there are 2 other ways that you can keep your ethics even higher. That would be to not do anything that would encourage the person to break the precept, and to not celebrate when that precept was broken. These are relating to speech and mental volitions, and this had a big effect on me. And I think this is where we also have to go back and look at the Baba's responses to some of those statements, and again, kind of push back what you said. You used the word that they were ridiculous, and maybe that they're passing them off as being something that is indicating a misunderstanding of the political or worldly matters. I argue it goes beyond that, because if you look specifically, when he is asked about the deaths, the killing, the intentional killing, rape, torture, everything that goes into how the Burmese have treated the Rohingya, Muslims, ethnic minorities, religious minorities, NLD supporters, democracy activists, etc., consistently, the Thabarwa Sayadaw does not express sympathy or remorse or condemnation or anything about this act of killing. It's true that if you keep asking him over and again, and very bluntly say, are you do you support or condemn the military killing in this instance, he'll say, oh, no, 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 I don't support killing of any kind. So if you really nail him to this, he'll finally say the right thing. But for the most part, he's not expressing sympathy, and he's usually defending it. He's denying it. He's talking about fake news or heightened emotions or other things. And so these aren't just ridiculous statements. This is an indication of a mental volition that's much deeper, because it's an inability to be able to hear about the killing and then respond in, I would say, a normal human way, but certainly a way that would indicate a higher ethical and moral understanding. And I think the transcript I read just before is really shocking in that regard, where he's asked about, and I'll say it again, just because it's so important to see how he chooses to respond, with his own agency to these questions about the killing of Muslims by the Burmese military. His first response is to state that Myanmar is a majority Buddhist country. I don't know what that means as an answer, but that's how he answers. When he's then pushed and asked again, his second response is to talk about the immaturity of democracy protesters in sharing fake news and getting emotional. So in his 2 answers, where he's given space, he categorically refuses to express any kind of condemnation or sympathy with innocent victims who are losing their lives to military aggression. I think that really has to stand out. And I think that you have to look at his words and silences as being very calculated. You know, he is consistently silent and doubting and suspicious about military atrocities. He uses words consistently that justify their power. He is silent about the suffering of the people. He uses words to describe how those that are resisting the military are immature and they need to look to him for guidance. He is silent about the importance of rule of law, federal democracy, the rights of non-Buddhists in the country, military corruption, everything else. So he chooses to use words that express his concern that Buddhism is at risk. It's quite obvious that this is what is he's basing his intention and intentionality towards. And it's funny because when I had those interviews and conversations with him, and I would push back and try to, I think as you did as well, try to present a better understanding of the facts and the details that were happening, and to expand his worldview, or to get him to engage in kind of a wider spectrum of understanding. He always came back to talking about the good deeds of the military, and just the importance of performing good deeds and meditating, detachment, cause and effect, etc., as well as the outer manifestations of building pagodas. And I guess if he thinks that the military is going to ethnic areas and whatever other crimes they're committing, well, if they're building pagodas, then that's reverence for Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. That's establishing peace in the world, because if he's equating peace with reverence, even outer superficial reverence for Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, then the military is doing peace despite everything else. But for me, these statements, they really lose all credibility, and they're hard to reconcile. And the example I gave to him when we were talking is, I said, well, it's almost like a soldier or a group of soldiers goes to a village, they burn the village down to the ground, they rape the women, they kill the men, they enslave the children, they steal the food. But then on the way out, one of the soldiers sees some village dogs and leaves some rice for the village dogs to eat. If the Sayadaw were to describe the soldiers came to a village and they fed the dogs, that's not a lie. That's true. But I mean, obviously, that's leaving out so much context that virtually makes it a lie. It would be like praising Hitler for being a vegetarian and not drinking alcohol, which, by the way, are true. Hitler was a vegetarian. He didn't drink alcohol. So it would be like saying Hitler is a vegetarian who didn't take intoxicants. Well, he did take intoxicants. He took drugs, but Hitler was a vegetarian who did not drink alcohol. You could say that. That's true. But if you just kind of forget the fact that he killed 12 million people and 6 million Jews and tried to eradicate the Jewish race, well, that doesn't really make a lot of sense in describing the good deeds of Hitler. And so when you're talking about, grasping ideas and doing good deeds and such, but you're ignoring the fact that the really egregious things that the military are doing, you're kind of losing your credibility. And I think I want to go back to, I've been making this argument lately that he's indicated that he's equating the idea of peace in the world or peace in the country with a reverence for Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. And I want to quote what he actually said that gave me this idea. He said, I want to say, one more thing to the people. My work for peace might be different from others because I am a Buddhist monk. So I only meet with people from the SAC who are interested in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. And then later he said, I think that what I learned from meeting these members of the SAC is more real than those people who learn from the media. I mean, this is shocking. This is right out there in the open. So he's saying that those members of the military that he believes have a reverence for Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and he is defining peace differently from others because he is a Buddhist monk. He's defining peace as this reverence for Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. And those military leaders who similarly show a reverence for Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha are the ones he's meeting with. And what they tell him is more real than all these other people believing what the media is saying. So, I mean, we don't have to dig very deeply in some of these cases. He's telling us who he is and he's telling us what he believes. I think the reason for these beliefs, I think, are things that we have to investigate more. And my personal theory is just that he's holding to this deep suspicion and discomfort with approaching development, seeing the military as the force which is going to prevent that. And because he's not able to have critical conversations where he gets information that challenges his own messianic thinking, then to borrow your word, stuck. There's a certain kind of stuckness in believing in the power of his own thinking. And if he's attached to something, as you mentioned, that there is an attachment to view, I think that there could be an attachment to the outer forms of Buddhism, the religion, the generalities of um, of seeing Burma as a Buddhist country now and going forward, that is inhibiting how these outer manifestations and generalities of Burma being a Buddhist country is actually at the opposite ends of violating really every core Buddhist precept in the process.
Mm, mm. Sure, I agree. Very good. I think you're helping. You're definitely providing very interesting insights. Talking about these issues a lot definitely helps to get some kind of clearer understanding. But at this moment, I think practically the best would be to um, make it very clear that the Thabarwa Sayadaw uh, is not sufficiently reliable in terms of information, in terms of knowledge about this issue. So he surely should not be listened to and followed in terms of any advice related to the present issue in Myanmar. He definitely may be helpful in instructing uh, arising passing of the mind, but I would not follow. I would not believe him anything that he would say about present situation in Myanmar. It seems that he's very much um, relying on the information given by the military, and therefore he's unable to accept any information from anywhere else.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I also want to go back to your conversation with him. And I have two questions about this. They relate. You can see where you want to take it. First, you had a very interesting hour and a half conversation with him where, as you say, you got coarse and you challenged him on certain issues pretty strongly. uh, we haven't yet gotten to some of the details of the exchange that you had, so I want to first ask you in some more detail about the kinds of challenges and analogies that you confronted him with, as well as his response, and then to follow that up based on the conversation we're having here. are are there different ways that you might have approached that conversation with the knowledge that you've gained in the last 2 hours?
So I didn't know, the situation. I didn't know that he's attached to the information given by the military, and so I'm wondering if I could have approached the situation, a little better, and maybe also take the discussion from a totally different end, and rather um, lead him towards something through questions. But instead, I thought that he's just missing information. That's what I thought, and that's what he seemed to confirm to me. But then later, when I uh, saw the transcript, the partial transcript of the interview that he had after I met with him with RFA, and later when I learned more about what he's saying and what he's doing, and also listening from you, I feel like he surely must know. And if he doesn't know, then something is seriously wrong with his ability to accept, to receive, not necessarily accept, but to receive information. It seems as if his mind is actually filtering some of the information that's coming to him. So he like doesn't know it, but he like almost unconsciously he ignores the information that's coming to him. Or I'm also still like uh, struggling to understand how does he not understand. So the plan was that I will come and I will be very kind to him and I will be listening to what he says, to his ideas and so on. And then I will present him with some of the information that he maybe doesn't know. And so that's what happened. So I came, we had a very nice conversation. How do you do? Are you healthy? Do you have everything you need? And so on. And he said he got he and I think about 20 or 50 of his students actually traveled. Quite a few, not sure the number, traveled here. He was accompanied by a large retinue of his students when he came here to Vietnam, to Hanoi, and he said that he has got the visa for 3 months here. I also have a visa for 3 months, but you may like to know that it's extremely difficult to get a visa for that. You need to have people who are well connected to the system here. It's legal, that's true, but still it's very difficult, even though it's legal. So then he said that he has the permission to teach Dhamma here in Vietnam, something that's that's indeed factually impossible. So he has got that permission. Actually, that permission cost about, I think, like $50,000, not dong, not dong, dollars. It's a very special experiment. Vietnamese supporters have selected him to as an exemplary person to be the number one example for the Vietnamese government that will gradually persuade the Vietnamese government that it's okay to allow foreigners to come here and teach Dhamma here. So many of his donors who are very, very wealthy, who are Vietnamese, who live in Vietnam, they paid a huge amounts of money to basically every or most of the ministries in the government uh, in uh, in the pledge for the chance. Give us the chance. We have here monk. He will be teaching Dhamma, and you will see that he is not causing any trouble. And they gave them, thousands and thousands of US dollars, um, and they really got the legal permission for the Sayadaw to teach Dhamma during these 3 months. So we are now about 3 weeks into these 3 months. So still over 2 months he will be here. The Sayadaw doesn't actually teach Dhamma, and you cannot teach Dhamma without Vietnamese translation. He does teach Dhamma in his monastery, but I'd say that's quite all what he's doing. So my donors, and so we are here like 3 monks who are now teaching Dhamma here quite often and far and wide. So that's me, Ashin Sarana. Then there's Burmese monk Venerable Asabha, and then there's Venerable Uttamasara, the Thabarwa Sayadaw. His other name is Uttamasara. So we are here 3 monks who are now here as foreigners who teach Dhamma at this moment in Vietnam, and he is the one who was selected to be the exemplary person, simply because he has these donors who are so rich and who have this very close relationship with governmental representatives. And so we were talking about this, and he was very happy about it, and so you may like to know that his life is very happy and very successful. He totally doesn't know that basically 99% of the Burmese people do not appreciate him. He has totally no idea about that. He totally didn't know it. I can assure you that he didn't know it. Again, of course, that's based on my perception of what he said, but I'm just so sure he had totally no idea, and nobody actually was open enough to tell him. Because later I learned from my Burmese assistant that actually it's true that nobody actually dared to tell the Sayadaw that people in Myanmar do not like him at all.
I told him 2 years ago. I
You
mean,
told him 2 years ago, yeah.
I
But
had I had the exact conversation. I mean, I'm looking at my notes from my interview 2 years ago as you're talking. I'll read my notes to you. He told me, I'm reading them word for word. He told me that the overwhelming Burmese response online was in support of what he said. I told him that I found that quite unbelievable. And then as we went on to have the discussion, I again, as respectfully as you can be when you're challenging a non-truth that is supported by evidence, I told him that anyone who would believe that he had the support of the Burmese people was delusional, was living in a bubble, because there's no evidence for this, that he's not supported, he's not trusted, he's not liked, he's not respected. And and I'm saying, I know I'm saying it coarsely and with emotion now. I was adhering to the truth as I spoke to him, and yet I was also trying to be respectful of my position as a layperson, and having this conversation going forward. But respectfully, I told him that you don't have credibility. People don't, and I said your words have hurt people. And I quoted back some of those statements that I quoted to you at the beginning of some of the really atrocious things he'd said, that are not even showing a mental inclination towards a
Mm,
condemnation or
mm,
a sympathy of killing.
mm,
And I said that consistently using your words and your silence both to consistently support one side and condemn the other, and the wrong side really,
mm,
that this is you've lost everything with the Burmese people. And if you think that you're the only person that can resolve this because both sides are listening to you, well, the military is not listening to you. You told me 2 years ago that you were going to get him to stop killing. That hasn't had any effect. It's gotten worse.
mm,
And you've only lost more respect and credibility from the people. And so if you're in a bubble where you're believing that you have this kind of influence, that the military listens to you and the people respect you, there's no evidence of this. And I told him this 2 years ago. And it's interesting that you
mm,
say that, when you were talking to him, this was kind of news to him and he wasn't really knowing and paying attention. Well, there's a couple things I can say to that. One is that this is a monk who's on his phone almost constantly. It's rare you find him without a phone in his hand or looking at
yeah,
something on a mobile device or some supporter showing him something. It's the most connected monk I've ever seen in Myanmar in terms of how online his presence is. So it really seems to confound
mm,
reality and
mm,
truth, that he and they are not aware of the contempt that many people have for him right now, given the things he said. And when I pointed this out to him, his response again was to go back to the immaturity of the protesters, their heightened emotional state, the fake news that the media has been giving them to make them angry at the military, that he's the only one with the real access to truth. They need to listen to him. And later, as you're talking about the kind of hope or optimism you had from confronting him with some of these features,
mm,
2 years ago, I had people, after the interview was done, we then spent hours and hours talking off the record to people on his entourage and his followers. And they told me, I was actually really impressed by it, I have to say, because we had very honest conversations. We were very direct and also respectful and engaging and critical.
mm,
And some of his closest disciples said, thank you so much for what you've done in bringing these kind of points. You've brought in some real important things for us to consider in terms of how we need to get outside of our bubble and understand what's really happening. And no one, this is what they said 2 years ago, no one has spoken to Sayada this way and given him this kind
mm,
of information, or confronted him like this.
mm.
And we really thank you for this. We thank you that you have pushed back consistently on these ideas and allowed us to see a different view. And we're really going to take this deeply into consideration. And
History repeats. Basically, that what you're telling me is exactly what happened with me. Exactly the same thing.
mhm.
Start, the middle, the end, exactly the same thing. History is just repeating.
Yeah, and so and I continued trying to engage, after the conversation, I tried to message the followers that I had been talking to, some of the kind of the highest members of his entourage, and to continue the conversation. And it didn't, it kind of petered out. I think they're so caught up in the worldwide global Thabarwa mission that
Mm,
these kind of contemplative details kind of slow them down. And they're what is being said is so confrontational to the belief system they have internally within their organization, which is, very messianic. Again, this is the only person that can solve the crisis. This is the only person that can deliver world peace. These are beliefs within the organization.
mm,
And these views conflicted with that so much, I think that the conversation just kind of died out along those lines. But I think that also, like, as we're talking about the Bawa Sayada, that we have to acknowledge that one of the reason we're spending this much time talking about him, this is not just one lone monk, one voice who's just kind of spouting his own madness or alternate reality or post-factual world that we're just picking on and trying to understand. This is a charismatic leader with a massive following of probably millions around the world that has received, many millions of dollars from institutions everywhere, including in the US, and has a major following. So this is someone, and as you talked about in the example with Vietnam, this is someone who is not just holding these views, but is starting to have real influence in where he goes and what he does. And so trying to have an understanding and pick apart what he's actually saying, what it means, and where it's coming from. This is very important because this is an influential person. I'll also add that in the San Francisco protest that you were talking about, there's part of that event where they're protesting, and I think that when Sayadaw is being the object of a protest, he characterizes it as, he characterizes the angry emotions and the misunderstandings and such. But there was a very significant part that happened at the end of that protest where the Burmese protesters in San Francisco said, um, if you will just publicly renounce your support for Min Aung Hlaing, the dictator of Myanmar, if you publicly say you do not support the dictator, you support the people, then then let's talk. Let's come together. Just say that. Just say those words. His response was that Min Aung Hlaing is building pagodas and big Buddha images. And he would not say that. He would not say those words. And when I was having this kind of confrontation with, after the interview that we recorded, we then talked offline to Sayadaw as well as his entourage. And when I was having those offline conversations, the thing that kept coming back from some of his supporters, some Burmese and some Western, was the good deeds. They were just kind of saying with this bafflement, how can people dislike us? We do so many good deeds. We take care of these people in marginalized communities, and we feed the poor, and and it's true. They do all of those things. I think probably we haven't spent enough time acknowledging the services they give that the Myanmar state does not, and how open and welcoming they are. And in fact, it's a complicated issue. There's a lot of people on CDM that are being taken care of by Thabarwa missions in Thailand as well as in Myanmar. They're materially supporting and financially supporting a lot of the victims of the Myanmar military. We have to say this. This balances the scale in the other way, and this is true. So I think because of that, the supporters were very confused and hurt that these so-called good deeds, and some of them really are good deeds. I mean, some of them really are providing services and support to populations that are bypassed by the state, and even now, as a result of the coup. But they saw this as kind of an inoculation, kind of like, how can they say these things about us when we're encouraging others to do good deeds and we're doing good deeds ourselves? And indeed, I mean, this is a part of the conversation we haven't gotten to in Thabarwa's thinking, but so much of the questions I was asking would come back to good deeds and to how he does good deeds and he encourages others to. And that, while there's some validity in these good deeds happening, and there's certainly a part of the way he characterizes Buddhist practice, and they can be part of ethical living in the world and being a good person, they also serve as kind of a bypass mechanism where when you're trying to provide him the correct information, challenge him and confront him on the wrong things that he's doing and saying and the harmful effects and impacts they're having in the community, the circular argument goes again to those good deeds, and then you kind of get stuck in that whole dynamic.
Yeah, we were talking about some things that he did not realize, and you have a little bit touched upon that point. And I think this was the strongest point, and it came at the end, actually, of our discussion of me with Venerable Sayadaw Uttamasara, where I explained to him that it's the NUG, the National Unity Government, which is the we call it interim government of Myanmar that now is stationed in the USA, The national unity government, which is led by some of the NLD members, but it's actually made up of many other parties as well. And NLD really takes maximum about 14% of the democratic efforts now in Myanmar. And I have the graph from one of the from the how to say that, the chief representative for NUG for the whole Europe. So I'm sure that my sources are pretty reliable, especially those sources about the democratic efforts. So the NUG is actually supporting the poor people in Myanmar. They provide poor people in Myanmar by food, with accommodation, with clothes. So I presented to the Sayadaw this issue as that this is actually what he's doing. Like Sayadaw, you support poor people by food, clothes, and place to stay. The NUG also supports the people in Myanmar by food, clothes, and place to stay. Whereas military just kills, steals. Uh, they imprison children and doctors and engineers. They hinder the international help that's coming from outside. And so that's totally something else than what you are doing. So if you think that what you are doing is good, then you definitely should support those who are doing the same thing that you are doing. And that means that you actually should support the NUG, you should support the democratic efforts. And I saw that this was one of the rare things that seemed to um, create a kind of wonder in him. But I saw, more importantly, wonder in the people around, because in the room where we had the interview, there were like 3 or 4 people who were recording this on their phones, and another about 5 people, monks. There were monks, nuns, laymen. There was then the Italian nun, Kemachari. So there were all these people, in that one tiny little room. And I could see that they were amazed that they didn't know this at all. They totally didn't know that the NUG is actually sending humanitarian support successfully. That's the point. Successfully. So many, many people in Myanmar who are poor benefit from that support, just like many, many poor people in Myanmar benefit from the support of the Thabarwa Sayadaw. And I think this was one point that definitely needs to be highlighted, because I wonder if Sayadaw still remembers it. Because as I have proposed, maybe the Sayadaw is stuck in his understanding. But I wonder if this particular point has made at least a hair breadth, change in his view.
I don't know. We talked 2 years ago, and I should say when we spoke, someone showed me what his comments were immediately post coup. I didn't believe it because as with you, I had a long-standing relationship and friendship with the Bawa Sayadaw and other members of his mission. And I also knew his story. I mean, he tells very clearly in the biographical story he did, the persecution that he faced personally and as a monk and as a mission under the military, and how he benefited from the openness of the NLD. And I couldn't understand it. And I when I saw the evidence of it, I was just shocked. I was shocked that he would, the thing that still stands out above all else is that statement that the military is doing good things in ethnic areas because these are not where Buddhists live, and they're going as Buddhists to build pagodas and make sure the faith can whatever he describes as the faith, but
Mhm.
make sure that that it's not an overt Christian or Muslim faith, but that it's a nationalist Buddhist faith. And I couldn't believe it. And so I approached that first interview just months after the coup, kind of wondering if he had said things out of context, or if he said things that he regretted, or if he had, those were very emotional times, so maybe he was saying things based on feeling or not proper understanding of the situation. And as very confused by the answer. And then a year later, we had a second interview. I prepared for it, weeks in advance, and really thought through, looked at all the material and tried to navigate how we'd have this conversation. And it was the same thing. And I have to say that as time has gone on, it's now 2.5 years on, I do not see his statements being better informed. I do not see a balance or a greater understanding being portrayed. I really, if anything, I see it going in the other direction. I see the things said more egregious, more, for lack of a better word, more cold. Really, pretty cold in terms of we're talking about the lack of freedom, death, oppression, violence, all of this, pretty unfeeling in how these things are talked about, in lieu of a nationalist, aggressive state Buddhism, which is preventing development. That's really the core of what I see consistently being said. And that thinking framed around a messianic belief in himself and his own access to truth and non-duality, that his supporters by and large continue to, as we say in English, drink the Kool-Aid, to uh where there's not much effect or impact at having dialogues or conversations that get through. And this is also the nuance that I want to express, is that I want to go back and say that I don't see him as a typical pro-military monk as you see some of these others. I don't see him, unless there's things I'm not aware of, or parts that are not coming out. Uh, these other pro-military monks are really benefiting materially in really profound ways from their positions, and they have for a long time. I don't see that as affecting or mattering to him quite as much, although I welcome other information I don't have access to with that. I see it more as a support for a force which is standing against the fears that he has.
Sure, I think we will need to wait some time to see if uh, uh, if the Sayadaw gets to some points. I, I'm I worry that I'm also a little bit delusional. Somebody made a joke in the Burmese community, and they took this video, of my conversation with the Sayadaw, and they posted it in YouTube saying uh, Ashin Sarana, enlightened, enlightened Thabarwa Sayadaw. And they used
Hmm.
the word that is used for the Buddha, helping someone to become enlightened. So that of course is meant as a joke, but I mean, I'm very hopeful that our conversation had some impact. Also, maybe even if it did not have impact on the Sayadaw himself, although still I have very strong hope that it did. I think it surely had some impact on the people there who were listening, and we had quite a few of his long-standing students present in that conversation. So I think that we will see as the time goes whether there will be some change. But again, I would like to propose that um, the Sayadaw is not taken as a trustworthy source for information about the military.
Yeah. Well, you said that, well, you kind of said to adapt a wait and see approach. I mean, I've been waiting and seeing for 2.5 years. So
Yeah, of course.
I don't know what else we're going to learn.
Yeah,
And
sure.
and and I also don't know what the response of Sayada and his entourage is going to be when there might be signs of good faith or dialogue or conversation in the moment, but then there's such an expansion and kind of a fervent belief in their mission that they don't really slow down to, from my experience, to sit and have these conversations. This is not unique to Tabawa. I mean, religious, spiritual movements, have suffered from this. In how do you balance the
Mm.
vast expansion of what your mission is with kind of the internal structure and solidity of it, and that's a tension that many face. But I would also kind of gently push back and challenge your statement that, okay, we don't trust what he says politically, but but we kind of leave that aside, but we go to his Dhamma teachings, because what is Dhamma but a truth of getting outside of our own views and our own attachment to those views, and being able to hear and take in other uh, other things that are perhaps challenging our preferences and our bias, and doing that objectively. I mean, meditation is is a practice of experiencing reality as it is, not as we'd like it to be, and not as we project it to be. And I think some of these incidents that we've already discussed, they're red flags, and we really have
Mm.
to say it for what it is. I mean, to state falsely that you have overwhelming support of Burmese online, this is not true. This is like say this is really akin to Trump saying that his inauguration was bigger than Obama's. We're living in a post-truth world. This is not true, and it's not an opinion. It's not when in your talk there was a we haven't talked about this yet, but in your conversation with him in the video, you discussed how the military was burning villages,
Mm.
and he did not agree with your truth. He thought that there was falsification
Mm.
of what was being reported, or who was really burning, or were things really burning. So if there is a figure who is denying basic facts of reality, whether their village is being burned by the military, or whether they're, to what degree Burmese are supporting them online. If there is someone that is not able to accept the truth of these things, then it does call into question what to make of a Dhamma teacher that is guiding a process, when this is not just kind of a messy political reality of different interpretations. These are facts in the world which have evidence behind them, which are being rejected. And so if you're rejecting basic facts in the world, what does that say about a Dhamma teaching that is trying to experience a subtle reality? And you could say facts and experiences on a very subtle personal level of the act of meditation. I do think that one thing bleeds over into the other, and I think it's concerning to have such a denial and rejection of facts which do not fit into your prism of the way you'd like to see the world, but then to move into a Dhamma space where suddenly detachment and adherence to the reality and the truth being experienced are suddenly acknowledged. I think it's hard to turn off and on from one sphere to the other.
Mhm. Yeah, I see here the difference between uh, the the attitudes that I myself label as the American attitudes and the attitudes that are Asian. So the attitude in the US is, if you make one mistake, now I will be exaggerating extremely and then I will try to back off. So if you make one mistake in your life, it means you're useless, you're a bad person, and nobody ever should talk with you. And if you die, it's the best for you. And in Asia, it's not like that. In Asia, if you make one mistake, you still have a chance to become a good person. So now I will back off and I will say, so in Dhamma, it is possible for a Dhamma teacher to say things that are not correct and also to say things that are correct. And those things that are not correct need to be recognized by a wise person as not correct. The correct things need to be recognized by a wise person as as those correct things. And so the wise person is able to actually live with someone who's saying wrong things and right things as well, keeping paying attention to those things that are not correct, paying attention to those things that are correct, and not paying attention to those things that are not correct. This, of course, will not work for the people in the US who believe that if someone is not perfect, then they're useless, they should not be talked to, and if they die, it's the best thing for them. And definitely you need to fire them from the job. You never should talk with them, and you should never ever associate with them, and they're just done for whole life, regardless how much they try, whatever they should. No, nobody cares. Done, finished. So we do not see that much in Asia. We do see that in Asia, but not that much. And we can see that again and again, with the Sayadaws after the situation changed from the military dictatorship to democracy in 2010 and a little later after that. We could see that the Sayadaws, who were previously criticized for supporting the military when democracy started to prevail and the people felt a little safer, they actually started to worship and trust the Sayadaws, who were previously scorned and insulted pretty bad. So this is something that is very interesting, especially in Myanmar, that there is this thing called forgiveness. I do not see this word forgiveness in the US. It's as if like it doesn't exist, like you did, when you're a 5-year-old or 15-year-old or 20-year-old, you said this bad sentence. Oh, you're so bad. Nobody ever should talk with you. Immediately we'll fire you because we just found it in your history. Dumb. Nobody will talk with you. That's so typical for US. I never hear of this in any other country in the world. It's again and again and again, the US style. But I never hear that in Asia. In Asia, if somebody finds out that you did something bad in the past, they will check you. They will see whether you're still doing it. And if they see you're still doing it, then of course they will fire you or they will not talk with you. But as soon at the very moment that you move on to the right side, so to speak, you're forgiven. And that's the point. You could see, even you said it, you have mentioned it, that the Burmese people said if the Sayadaw would just say, that he doesn't support the military, then they would forgive him. You see, this is something that does not work for the US people. No, American people are not like that, according to how I have learned and perceived what's happening to anyone who has been found out in the past to say something bad, whatever. Okay, insulting is the worst thing in the world ever said. No, cannot forgive. Never. Forgiveness does not exist for American people. So far, that's my perception. Of course, it can be wrong. Of course, I'm putting them all into one little bag. But for the time being, that's how I'm perceiving the perception of the American people. Totally not in Asia. And my point is very Asian. So, okay, so the Sayadaw, and my point is not temporal, but it's actually topical. So what does it mean? So it doesn't mean that the Sayadaw would stop doing one wrong thing now and then do a good thing now, or in the future he would stop having his wrong view and then he would move on to the right view. So okay, so when he will move to the right view, we will come and follow his teachings. That's not exactly what I'm suggesting, which would be temporal, that means related to time, but I'm suggesting a topical attitude. So the Sayadaw is teaching something wrong related to Myanmar, related to politics, related to the future, related to how society should work. So that's one topic. But then there is another topic where the Sayadaw suggests that we stay in the present moment, that we consider the impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self in the body and the mind. And that's a topic that's correct. So we would then be concerned with the correct topic, and we would not be concerned with the wrong topic. And as we are concerned with the correct topic, then we follow the correct topic. And as wise people, we would not be considering the wrong topic until the Sayadaw gets the right view. So that's my point. Now, you may still disagree with that, and you may say, but that's still totally something else than somebody who has stopped doing something wrong and they turn to become a right person, and then we forgive him. So where do you get forgiveness here in this case, in the topical style? Well, in the topical style, you get forgiveness continuous in the present moment. So you continuously forgive the Sayadaw for being, probably best word that would work here, for being, and I need to check whether the word is too bad. It says, a wicked or evil person, somebody who does evil deliberately. Well, that's not exactly what I want to say. I wanted to propose the word scoundrel, but that's not exactly what I mean. A politic old scoundrel here, dictionary says. That's not exactly what I mean. Somebody who is attached to a very pernicious view, to a very dangerous view. But the forgiveness would be here continuous and forgiving. Okay, so the Sayadaw has a limited view, has a limited idea, has a wrong intention, wrong understanding, wrong direction, but at the same time, he has something good that he can offer. So, for those who are not able to find any monk in the world other than Sayadaw Uttamasara, they think, oh, Sayadaw Uttamasara is the only monk in the world. Everybody else, they just don't understand Buddhism and they don't know anything. There are people like that. So when they think this and they're not able, or it is not possible for them to detach from the Sayadaw, to detach from the community, and they're stuck in that community, then I would suggest that they take the Sayadaw for the good things that he's doing, namely that he teaches impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self in the body and the mind. And they do not consider his statements that are not directly related to these teachings. So that's what I would like to suggest. But it's true that I'm fully disappointed with this attitude of non-forgiveness, and I would love to learn. Probably this would be for a private discussion or totally something different kind of discussion. I would love to know why is this an amazing idea to find in history, like 20 years ago or 30 years ago, what somebody said somewhere or somebody did somewhere else, when they were a kid with undeveloped brain, and then fire them from a job and destroy all of their reputation and totally remove them from anything that they ever had and that they could have. Something that I see only in the US and something that I just cannot understand.
Well, I mean, it's interesting you say that because my experience is actually the opposite of how you describe. Um, I had consistently Burmese listeners and friends that were insisting from the early days that he be absolutely condemned, and I'm sure that the kind of online and in Burmese online spaces. There's a lot of debate right now in terms of how they call out potential military supporters or people who are not going on CDM, or how they express that kind of anger and disappointment, and the Bawa definitely fell into that category. And
That's what they are saying now because they're emotional. But see, I do not bet, and I, as a monk anyway, I do not touch money and things, and I cannot exchange things, and we have a lot of rules here, so I cannot really bet. But I can assure you, based on what happened in the past already, that as soon as democracy starts to prevail and some kind of peace appears, all of the Burmese will be back worshipping the Sayadaw, Uttamasara Sayadaw, and they will trust everything he says, and he will be successful just as he was in the past. I can totally assure you about that. It's just now that they don't feel like it.
let me respond to your overall point. My experience was actually opposite than from how you're describing. I am an American, and when I first heard about Sayadaw's comments, I took time for reflection, for contemplation. When we had the discussion, the first discussion we had was really not confrontational. It was really clarification because I couldn't believe what was coming to me. As I said, I thought that there was a bad translation, or there was missing context, or there was something that had come out the wrong way, or something like this. And so actually the situation I faced was diametrically opposed to what you're suggesting. I had Burmese that were insisting that I use the full force of the platform to condemn him immediately and call out everything for what he was and what he was saying, I was actually from a position of saying, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Let's hold the brakes. I think I know him. I've respected him before. Let me really understand and dig into what this is." Once I saw those statements for what they were, and once I had that conversation back and forth where he indicated that he very much stood by what those statements were and then made more statements on top of those and showed himself as being very close to opening and understanding the greater truth beyond his own perception of that, then I started to form an opinion. But that was a long process. And actually, as I was trying to understand what he really meant and what he said, the fact that I wasn't acting fast enough to condemn him, I had Burmese online who were calling into question my sympathies and the platform in general, and that were actually suggesting that by not condemning him fast enough, I was secretly trying to cover his military sympathies. And perhaps I also supported the military because I was part of this big conspiracy and ruse that, everything else. I mean, it was ridiculous, but it was like there was such a force from some members of the Burmese community to want to rush out in judgment and condemnation that I was trying to be reflective and understand. And eventually I do think I've gone as far as I can, at least at this point, in trying to unpack and understand take his statements and his actions and make sense of them, or at least as far as I can. But they were not apparent at first, and there was definitely a rush or a push to just condemn in the strongest of terms, and if that didn't happen, to call suspicion to, well, what are you holding back? What is the real reason that you're not making this kind of statement? I think that also I'm reflecting back to my conversations with him, and he would always fall back on these teachings of, he teaches detachment and doing good deeds and non-duality and not and especially not being attached to views. And I remember saying to him, if you are continuing to make these statements about the world, these statements that are insisting that the military is doing good things in ethnic areas, and that, development is not compatible with Buddhism, and that the people wanting democracy are immature and emotional, and all these other things that were, and denying the truth of the military atrocities, kind of on and on. Your Dhamma teachings of detachment and good deeds, they're meaningless. They're worthless. No one who is listening to what you say about these other things is going to think that this part of your Dhamma teachings are valid, that they're worth anything,
Mm.
because these other views you're saying are so atrocious and so harmful and upsetting to so many people that are living through this terror, that whatever you say, whatever Dhamma teachings you put out there on detachment or good deeds, they won't mean anything. Like, you've lost your credibility. And um and so, and yet there is a very devoted following that doesn't that hasn't heard some of the more atrocious things he said, because of possibly they haven't been translated into English, or who are following his Dhamma teachings without this wider understanding of the context and of what's happening in Myanmar and his relation to it. So that is true. But for those people, mainly the Burmese, I mean, there are very few foreigners I know that are really aware or disturbed by what he said. I think that those foreigners they're in a very small intersection of those that are attuned to the crisis in Myanmar and yet also are interested in Dhamma practice. I think that's a very small subsection. So there's very few foreigners that are really at that intersection that have that understanding. But I think that there are many Burmese that are living through this terror, and
Mm.
whatever his teachings might be about detachment and meditation and generosity and good deeds and these other things,
Mm.
they're kind of hard to take seriously
Mm.
and to follow when that's being said simultaneous to these really just denial of reality, and constantly using his voice to support the military and using his silence to not speak out in favor of the democracy movement or to speak out against the atrocities of the military. I mean, he really uses his words and he uses his silence in very calculated and consistent ways.
Well, what can I say about that? I understand that different. Um, how can I deal with this? I do not, want to, on it's a little bit challenging case for me because so, and I also need to be careful about what I say, because when I say things, I need to be very careful. I'm trying. I know I'm not successful, but I'm trying, and I'm trying to find out like resolve this problem. So if he's teaching Dhamma, that's correct. And at the same time, he's teaching things that are not correct. So what should we do about that? So should we say, so don't listen to anything he says? Or should we say, listen to everything he says? My suggestion was listen to only that which is true, what he says. Now you suggest that people should not listen to anything that.
No. I did not suggest that people should not listen to anything. What I said was that I'm not trying to change the course of events here or dictate what should happen or what shouldn't happen. That's not my role here.
Okay.
I'm describing what I see already taking place. I'm describing the reality as I know it. And I'm saying that there are certainly many Burmese who are still continuing to follow him as a monk. I'm not denying that. But there are also many Burmese that are so fed up with
Mm,
the th- the non-truths that he is saying and the support of the military that he's standing by, that his Dhamma talks are meaningless to them, to a large community. I'm not saying that that should or shouldn't be the case. I'm not advising people what they should and shouldn't do in terms of where they seek their spiritual advice. I have no intention of that. I'm saying that there are those who have tuned him out because he's so out of touch and unreliable when it comes to basic things happening in front of them, that why would you turn to someone who's so unreliable and adverse to truth and the reality that's happening in the real world, and turn to that person for a Dhamma teaching where you're experiencing truth at the subtlest level. I'm not telling people what they should or shouldn't do. I'm saying that there are many that are already have no interest in trusting him on that guidance, given the things he's saying about the world. And I think we've seen that with Siddhagu Sayadaw, and this is where I think that in many cases, when you compare uh, Thabarwa Sayadaw to the cohort of the pro-military monks, there's many ways he's not similar, as I've discussed before. But I think one way that he is similar is that once you start to lose faith in how a monk is interacting in a complex, messy environment where there's daily terror happening,
mm.
it's pretty hard to turn that part of your mind off and say, oh, let me hear what Siddhagu Sayadaw has to say about, I don't know, this scripture, or this sutta, or this act, because he's already lost so much credibility. Why are you going to respect and listen to that? And I think that's already happened a lot with the Baba Sayadaw. I'm not advising people what to do and what not to do.
I
I think that's already happening to some extent.
Okay, yeah, definitely. Like when you contrast it with City Lucero, it makes much more sense than without the contrast. Yeah, it's true. It's true. Uh, it's very. I find it very interesting that somebody would be listening to Sita Gusieto, his interpretation of a sutta, to what he has done. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very
And
much.
that's even not to say that Siddhaku Sayadaw's interpretation of a sutta, it might have validity, but he's lost so much credibility in another sphere that it would be, well, to just go to an absurd analogy, because I've already referenced that Hitler was a vegetarian who didn't drink
Mm,
alcohol.
mm.
Well, Hitler might have written some very um, compelling statements about why one shouldn't drink alcohol and why one wouldn't eat meat. But if you're going to Hitler for your dietary suggestions and your avoidance of intoxicants or of alcohol, like, you're crazy because of his litany of other things. And I'm in no way am I making this comparison apples to apples with these Burmese Sayadaws, but it's just it's not, in terms of extremes, it doesn't really fit. But if you don't take it to the logical extreme, it's still that if you have done something that has shown you to lose so much credibility in one sphere, it's kind of hard to delineate that and separate that out so that you're still credible in another sphere.
Sure, but still, I can assure you we can then make another podcast or private discussion, whatever you like, after democracy comes back to Myanmar. We can discuss whether the faith of the Burmese people has returned to the Sayadaws or not. And I'm just so sure that it will return 100%. So thank you very much for this great opportunity, and I am truly appalled and very unhappy about that. And they're also opening up me, to better understanding of the situation of Thabarwa Sayadaw, the progressing situation at this moment, and the democratic efforts that are happening, and the truth about the military. I could have provided it in a pretty telling way in Burmese to the Burmese people in both written and spoken, which the Burmese people very much appreciated, and they found it very much inspiring. And I have heard from quite a few Burmese people that some of the information I have mentioned they actually never heard before. And so I think this definitely the visit was helpful. Not sure whether it was helpful to Thabarwa Sayadaw. We'll see in the future. So thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much for the ample information that you have provided. And hopefully I will not suffer too much backlash for what I've said about everything that I've said.